Welcome to my awesome Friday evening. You're listening to me, Heidi, Hollis, the Outlander. Welcome to the show, everybody. You guys are in for some fun tonight. First, I'm going to tell you what this show is about in general. This show is about bringing outlandish and interesting topics to the forefront, from aliens, angels, ghosts, demons, holy encounters, shadow people, to Bigfoot, to the outlandish. I always say if it's weird, we're here, and now you are too, so you're just like me. If you don't know who I am when it comes to the outlandish, personally, I'm someone who has been there, seen that, experienced it, freaked out, found some answers, wrote about it, got over it, and now I'm hoping to help others do the same thing and understand this freakish world of ours. I welcome you to come visit my main website, which is HeidiHollis.com. There are things there, I swear when I say this, my parents don't even know all the stuff that's on there. And you'll find I have YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, all that good stuff. And, this network is so fantastic. We have our own IRN app, Inception Radio Network app. Most of the people, I know you guys listen to us through the app, but I got to tell you, we've got a big audience from iHeart, iTunes, so many other avenues. It's getting close out there, but very few of you listen to us live for some reason. Hopefully at one point that'll change, because then I could get more phone calls from you. But I don't mind. I'm not going to complain, because I always have a good time on this show, no matter what. And this is a fun way that you can hear this program. Just dialing a number, 712-770-8888. My parents do it. They just put the speakerphone on, and voila, it's very easy. And you could call into this show at any point, 1-888-919-2355, or go to Skype and find Inception Radio Network, and MJ will forward all your comments and questions to me. But the one that I'm always actively in and doing is during the show, I'm in the chat room. That is irnchat.com. So I will take your questions as they're coming live. So I always have fun doing that. And you know what? I have been getting more to your comments and questions and emails with the Outlandish Corner. But sometimes there are some guests that I have to forego doing that first 30-minute segment. But I still want to welcome you guys to write me about anything and everything out of the ordinary that you're experiencing to dusoutlander@gmail.com, or through my main website, which is HeidiHollis.com. And, I'm not a psychic. I'm not a guru. I am a Christian lady that has just been writing these books, having dealt with a lot of odd things myself, and, just trying to help each other get through this stuff. And it can be done. And you know what? You guys are in for such a huge surprise, because I think that I've got my brother from another mother coming on tonight. And I'm going to introduce him officially right now. Gary Bates, he is an Australian who now heads up the U.S. Office of Creation Ministries International as its CEO. He's authored or co-authored 6 books on the issues of origins, but is best known for his book called Alien Intrusion, UFOs and the Evolution Connection, which went on sale on Amazon, and it hit the top 50 bestseller list. In fact, he's been interviewed, and he's been all over the place being interviewed, I have to say. And, I have to tell people, he's got a movie coming out called Alien Intrusion, Unmasking A Deception. That's going to premiere for one night in over 730 theaters across the U.S. And it's going to be phenomenal. So you guys got to go to alienintrusion.com. But first, and that's going to be a January 11th, by the way. So check your local listings for Alien Intrusion, the movie. I'm going to go look for it. Everybody give a round of applause to Gary Bates. Woo! All right, Gary, that was a big old audience. I know you didn't see it, but they were really there. How are you?
It's good. It was better than throwing peanuts at me anyway.
So where are you hailing from right now? Where are you at?
I'm in the deep south, Atlanta, Georgia, which is the U.S. Office for Creation Ministries International, I often joke that's why I have this deep Southern accent, you know.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I was fortunate enough to live in Australia, in Melbourne, for a bit, and I always describe to people, it's like a British cowboy accent to me. I love it. So it's all good. It's all good. It's a lovely accent.
Well, you must have been back here for a bit because you said Melbourne instead of Melbourne.
Oh, yes. Yeah. No, I was a visiting person trying to become, how could I say, become a citizen over there. I loved it. Oh my gosh. But, I'm just amazed at what you've been able to accomplish. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised that we're very, on my show in particular, talk about Jesus all the time. I've written books on aliens and all the above, and the conflict and the deception that is going on with a lot of these beings that are out there and what they're doing to people and how it's quite demonic. So when you popped up, I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like, this is awesome. So we have got a lot to talk about. So
Sure.
I have got to hear your background. Like, let's start from the beginning. What got you involved in looking into such odd topics?
Well, I grew up a science fiction fan and a pretty ardent evolutionist. And when I became a Christian, obviously you challenge or things change. And in particular, your worldview changes. I think a lot of people, when they have a change of faith or from no faith to faith, they may well try to incorporate the things they've learned of the world into that faith. I quickly learnt that, I might have to have a different way of looking at the world. And so the issue of origins, evolution, was a big one growing up a science nerd and a science buff. I was heavily influenced by science fiction. I'd always believed that, aliens must exist. It's a question we see, we hear about. You see the footage, you see the photos, you watch the movies, you read the books. And I have to say, I had a moment, and this is actually before I became a Christian, but I read a book, you probably know it, the Roswell incident by Charles Moore, or Berlitz and William Moore.
Oh, yeah.
And, in that they had this alleged smoking gun piece of evidence, which was Harry Truman's signature on the creation of MJ-12. And I kind of put that book down, said to my wife, that's it. Aliens are real. The government's been lying to us. And so then when I became a Christian, I wanted to revisit all of this and dealing with a ministry that deals with the issue of origins. And by the way, can I just say, Creation Ministries International, creation.com, we've got 7 offices around the world. And to the best of my knowledge, I think we employ more scientists, more PhDs than any Christian ministry in the world. So we are very heavily science-based. And one day I realizing the effect that science fiction had on me, another big landmark was the Close Encounters of the Third Kind movie. I wished I was Richard Dreyfuss getting taken up in the spaceship. And I thought, science fiction is so huge. I did some research, and at the time, around about 90% of the highest grossing movies of all time was sci-fi. Star Trek: The Next Generation is the most syndicated TV show, or was at that time.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, what a great way, for me personally, I wanted to share my newfound faith. I thought, what a great way to lead people to discuss these issues, particularly Christianity and theology, and ponder those big questions in life, like, where do we come from, why are we here, what happens to us when we die? So I started to revisit everything I'd believed about UFOs and aliens. And I heavily invested in it. I read tons of books, went to UFO conferences. And as you know, or as anybody who's actually seriously researched it, and I'm probably going to say that word a few times, Holly, because everybody has an opinion on this, and they're always quick to tell you your opinion. And I rub shoulders with guys in MUFON and in UFO circles, and I actually find we're in agreement about a whole bunch of stuff. And like you, the serious researcher understands that the phenomenon is very deceptive, very damaging to people. So when I first started to discover that, and I started to meet people who claimed they'd been abducted, and the traumatic experiences they had, obviously it was very confronting for me, because it wasn't the Hollywood version I'd got from Close Encounters and the Roswell incident and all of this type of stuff. Yeah. So that's really my story, and it led to the book. And, I'm obviously one of few Christians. I'm certainly I think I might be the only creationist who probably deals with it. But I really tried to be fair and honest with the book. People who've read it said it doesn't read like a Christian book because we tried to deal with the facts and the evidence as it lays. And in fact, being an Amazon top 50 bestseller, more non-Christians have actually read it than Christians. And people have found it pretty satisfying and given them answers.
Wow, that's nice to hear, because I do find that more and more people are opening up to the possibilities, and lo and behold, the government has been flapping their gums a wee bit anyways on the topic, so that's been kind of inviting. So you have this whole encompassing background that really got you to where you are today. And, I don't know about you, but it's like when you come forward and you say, I believe aliens exist, and I'm a Christian, and this and that, and I think these other things are going on too. For some reason, people would always think like I was highly were all these things confusing to me? Did it cross the wires in my head? And for me, I'm like, no, things seems pretty crystal clear for me. So I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm not sure whether you believe aliens exist. I hope this doesn't put people off going to see my movie. I suppose aliens or extraterrestrials is all how you defined it, but in the idea that there are beings that live on other planets and travel here in their faster than light spaceships, I am certainly not a subscriber to that view. And I think that any serious researcher looking at the evidence, and in the movie we've got John Mack and Bud Hopkins, who certainly don't come at it from a Christian perspective. But they all agree that it's deceptive. They hide their true intent. And they would say, yes, they're not coming here from a planet far, far away. The main view today, and by the way, we just went to South Korea to interview a guy called Joe Jordan, who's interviewed and met over 400 people who've claimed these types of experiences. And he pretty much says that, in the time I've known him, which is 20 years, that really the movers and shakers in MUFON and other places, they don't subscribe to the extraterrestrial hypothesis anymore, but they mainly subscribe to the interdimensional hypothesis. Mm-hmm. So I would say that myself and my secular colleagues in this area, we would agree about the nature of the phenomenon, although we might disagree about its origins. And it's as I said, the most polarizing people, when they hear you're a Christian, or you might say aliens don't exist, are the kind of the garden variety, bench warmers who have an opinion. But the real researchers who get into it, we're quite happy to work together and rub shoulders, because we all know it's mysterious. And, you mentioned the government, and when you think about it, since Kenneth Arnold saw those flying discs that he called, saucers skipping across the sky in 1947, we've kind of got 80 years worth of data. The government's investigated it under Project Sign and Grudge and Blue Book and the Condon Report, and then just, what providential timing with Luis Elizondo releasing that F-18 Navy pilot footage a few weeks ago, and the government saying since 2012, 2007, 2012, they've been investigating aerial phenomena. So clearly the government knows something's there, and generally will people say, well, they must know what it is. But actually, I don't think they have a clue what it is, because if it is supernatural or interdimensional, how do you test such things? And so, there's something going on, but most people would believe that these days. I think that it's interdimensional in nature, and as a Christian, I would just use the word supernatural, spiritual. And by the way, it was Jacques Vallée who coined that term, wasn't it? A collaborator in Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So he's the one that coined the term.
Yeah. I have to, talking about that release of that, the slight disclosure in regards to the Pentagon investigating, I had mixed emotions. I was a bit peeved. I gave it a 2-finger clap. I'm like, oh, you admit to a little $22 million budget for a few years. That's what you were all up to. Over the years, I have met hundreds, if not thousands, and spoken to millions in regards to their experiences regarding these beings and the suffering that they have all endured individually. People have lost families, their lives, their livelihood. They've killed themselves. They've gone, insane and isolated themselves. And they're going to, Harry Reid is just going to, oh, this is my little pet project. No, dude, you deceived the American public. You called us crazy. Since when is abduction of anyone okay? You have thousands of people stepping forward saying, I have been abducted, I've been violated and experimented on, and these people have been ridiculed. Thank God I've never been abducted. But they've been ridiculed for claiming such a thing and hospitalized. I am not that impressed with their little release.
Well, that's interesting. I'd love to unpack this with you and get your thoughts too, because having researched this for a long, long time, the government's always been very silent. When Mexico gets one of those sightings, the Air Force releases the footage and they say, we don't know what it is. They've always been very honest. But of course, the US government's always said, we can neither confirm or deny, or we don't think it's any threat to the nation. 1952, you had the Washington UFOs. We feature that, in fact, in the movie because we've got one of the radar operators from that event. And he gives these stories, and he actually turns around and he says, I've been trying to tell people this for 60 years. He said, and you're the first guys that want to listen to me. And we have General John Sanford, who was at a press release. It resulted in the biggest press conference since World War II, and all he could say is it poses no threat, to the nation. Everyone wants to know, what is it? What is it? What is it? But as I said, I don't think they know. So in this particular case, I'm going to be honest. You say you had mixed emotions. That's how I was for a while. Yeah. And then as I kind of processed it, and I've got to qualify this, I am not a conspiracy theorist. Dealing with a scientific organization, I often think the answers are much simpler than going to all sorts of, extrapolations and unwarranted speculation. But I was reeling when I thought about it because Luis Elizondo headed the project. Harry Reid defended it. And I thought, you said it, I thought, how has this information got out? Because when I left school, I actually did, although I'm Australian, I finished my high schooling in England. Mm-hmm. And I ended up joining the police force. Oh. And I had to sign, even though I was in training, I had to sign a document called, the Official Secrets Act of Her Majesty's Government. And I am still bound today, could be thrown in prison if I was ever to release anything confidential that I learned. Fortunately, I never learnt anything confidential, so that's okay. But you can't tell me that high-ranking officials in the government can suddenly leave their posts and freely release information and footage from the Air Force. This is a soft release, absolutely. Yes. And the reason I'm reeling from it is I do think, for the first time, I've been saying for many years, that because the government doesn't know what it's dealing with, we could be getting ready for a time where the government turns around and says, well, we think we've been dealing with something extraterrestrial. And that is going to cause a massive paradigm shift, because when I wrote my book, I've got a quote in there that's about 25 years old, where the government said we would never release that type of information because it would be so shocking, it would likely cause havoc and panic across the country. Well, I don't think people would even bat an eyelid anymore if you said, "Hey, the aliens have been visiting us and we've known about it," and it'd be like, "Yeah, see, we told you so. The government's been hiding it all this time." So I do actually think we're on the verge of disclosure.
I think we're on the verge of it. But you know what? This was so entertaining to me, because for years, I'd asked the question to people, so why do you think the government won't tell us? Oh, the panic. Now, that guy came on, Elizondo, Luis came on, and he was talking about how he headed that project for the Pentagon. And he said, well, the conclusion is we are not alone. I'm like, he admitted it right there. That's the government. And I turned to people, on the street. So what did you think of the big announcement? It's like, what do you mean? It's like aliens. They're real. The government admitted to it. And it's just
don't remember saying that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, he said, it was on CNN, and he said, we are not alone. And I was like, wow, he said it right there. Oh. I was like, and the people, they're just like, oh, yeah, that was cool. And they put their headphones back on. I was like, where's the big panic? Where's this big, whoop-de-doo that they said was going to happen? I was stunned with that. And I was stunned that he actually said those words on CNN. Yeah, definitely. So it's like, okay, you guys said something. There's no way that man would be sitting there talking this way and still be alive unless it was okayed to be done, like you were saying. So,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely agree. A few years ago, and I kind of said that I think it wouldn't surprise me someday if the government said that. About 4 years ago, I wrote an article for our website at creation.com, which is a pretty difficult one to remember, but it was called Prepare Ye the Way, the Aliens Are Coming. And I cited all these examples over the world, like the United Nations preparing an exo-ambassador for when the aliens arrive. It's just become so much of our culture. In the UK, a school had put a crashed flying saucer in the football pitch at the school, a soccer pitch to my American friends, and they did a crash test drill. In other words, what should the children actually do? It was like almost, one of those nuclear warning tests or exercises that the kids used to go through here, and they made them go through it. There was about a dozen examples where you could almost see the population getting readied for this type of stuff. But you mentioned the seriousness of abductions, and obviously we're going to talk about that. But not only that, John Keel wrote, and I quoted him in my book, that he saw serious UFO researchers kind of going off the deep end because they're taken in by the strangeness of it all. And I actually think, Heidi, we've started a Facebook page for our movie, Alien Intrusion. People can go to that. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, come in and comment, say, religion's got nothing to do with this. It's going to... yeah, exactly. And, when you look at, the comments from the entities themselves, well, religion is very much a part of it. But I got to say this, too, real quick. I swear I was one of the first ones out there because I wrote a book in 97 called The Secret War. And I was the first one to say, if they're just aliens, why, when you say the name of Jesus, they leave? Why does that work then? And I have known hundreds of people to implement that. And they all thought I was nuts in the beginning. I'm like, look. It works. Try it. And I've heard a lot of success. I'm sorry to cut you off, but you're talking about the religion. I'm like, gotta say it. Well, exactly. I mean, I think you've just made the point there. I mean, in the movie, we have a load of testimonies with people who were former abductees and how they put a stop to it. And again, if that comment comes through that what has religion got to do with it, it tells me again that they've never seriously researched the subject. But here's the point I really wanted to make. When I was talking about researchers going off the deep end, you see, if naturalism is all there is, if you and I are just rearranged pond scum with the result of a giant cosmic accident, there's no meaning and purpose to our life, and when we die, there's nothing. So here's the issue. See, straight out evolution, naturalistic, atheistic, materialistic evolution with no divine intervention whatsoever, cannot actually account for a spiritual realm. Sagan said, matter is all there is, ever was, or ever will be. And so if this is interdimensional, the reason these guys go off the deep end is because you can't test it, you can't measure it, you can't weigh it. And to me, whether it's Christianity, in fact, all the great religions of the world all understood that there was a spiritual realm to our existence. And, if I was talking about, for example, how the Bible describes them, angels, the cultural view of angels are these ethereal spirit beings with fairy wings. As well as I do, Heidi, never once in the Bible are they ever recorded like that. Not once. They appear physically. They sit down and they eat with people. They affect our nature, our environment. The conjurers in Pharaoh's court were able to manifest matter out of a stick, turned it into a snake. They kill people. And if I was a secular UFO researcher and I just didn't mention the Bible, he'd be going, check, 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 because that's everything that happens in the UFO phenomenon, isn't it?
It is. It's interesting, too. Now, I don't know how much you keep your ear to the ground of the people that are experiencing alien contact, like the abductions and contact in general. But I know that my emails change from just hordes of alien abduction, this and that. And then that just like dropped off. And it became, I put out 2 phenomena, shadow people, hat man, and it all changed to demonic. Though they may see an alien near what was happening, including shadow beings or whatnot, but it all became very demonic, and they felt like it was a battle of all battles for their soul. And like and I spoke to several other researchers in regards to alien abduction and what they're hearing out there, and they're like the alien abductions have dropped. It's changed. What have you been seeing?
Well, I tell you, we interviewed, you would know Nick Redfern, right?
He's a good friend, yeah.
Yeah, so we interviewed Nick for the documentary, went to Dallas and interviewed him and had a great time with him. And he was telling me things that, to be honest, I didn't really know about. And one of the things that was surprising is that in his book where he featured Ray Boucher, the MUFON researcher who was also a Catholic priest, and Ray said he was contacted by the government because they literally felt that they were dealing with something demonic. There was a dark cloud over their operation. Strange things were happening. People were even dying. And that was a new one to me. And he said, look, I didn't, and Nick's not a Bible-believing Christian, right? So when he went to research this and he actually spoke with some of the people in the government that Ray mentioned, he was able to confirm that. Yeah. And so that was a real eye-opener to me. And and when he kind of talked about the stories of, what people think of the Men in Black, again, it ain't the Hollywood version.
If it's not Will Smith, don't get the door. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. And so I have to say some of that was new to me. Yeah. What I wanted to do in the movie and the way that we kind of do it is we take a scientific approach. So we say, here's the popular view. And by the way, we got good old Bo Duke, or Superman's dad in Smallville.
Yeah, I love it. John Schneider
to narrate it. And, what we do is we say, well, what is it not? So we've got PhD, aeronautical engineer, PhD chemists, PhD biologists. Real joy for me was to interview a guy called Dr. Henry Richter, who's one of the fathers of the space program. He actually helped invent America's first satellite, Explorer 1, which was in competition, obviously, with Sputnik at the time. And I grew up a space junkie, so that was a real joy for me. So we talked about the physical limitations, so we're charitable. We say, well, even if they are out there, could they even get here? And this is something, when I go to UFO conferences, people love to challenge me about, and they say, well, you can't say it's impossible because, 100 years ago, we thought manned flights to the moon would have been impossible. But hang on, you could go to the manned flights in the room within our lifetime and you don't have to defy the laws of physics. We know the laws of physics work here on Earth and they're the same everywhere we look out in the universe. We look at the rotations of the galaxies and so on. Otherwise, the universe would fly apart. So we say, well, okay, if it's not them, if they can't get here, is it possible that the universe is still full of life? So then we deal with the issue of the Fermi paradox, and we actually did a really brilliant animation, I think, covered because the music's been specially composed as well. And, to show the extrapolation, of course, Fermi says within a few million years, we would all be tripping over each other. So we'd definitely be seeing each other if there were that many alien civilizations. So like peeling an onion, you start to peel off the layers and you say what's left. We're not denying that people see things. And I've always said, like I did in my book, the only place we can try to unpack what's happening is in the area of abductions. Now, someone's experience that they have doesn't necessarily make it true or valid. But as John Mack found, and we have a really neat interview with him from when he was on Oprah, Oprah's there saying, what are you talking about? You're a Harvard-trained psychiatrist. You run the department there. And he says, well, we interviewed all these people. And he said, make-believe, childhood fantasy doesn't present like this. People lying doesn't present like this. Dreams are not like this. The only thing that presents like this is real experience. The post-traumatic.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
We've got to get to our break. You guys, you're listening to me, Heidi Hollis, the Outlander, and we will be right back. Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to me, Heidi Hollis, the Outlander. Remembering always if it's weird, we're here. And we're speaking with Gary Bates, who's discussing his new movie, Alien Intrusions, and it's getting really interesting. I mean, I want you to finish your thoughts on what you were mentioning. I forgot where you were at.
That's
you gotta
fine.
finish it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I think I was talking about John Mack,
Yes.
who he was on Oprah, and he heard about all these people that were having these alleged alien abduction experiences, and he thought, he didn't basically say, I think they're crazy, but he wanted to study them from a clinical point of view. And one after the other, he says, they don't know each other. They've got a lot more to lose than to gain from telling their stories. They feel marginalized. And he obviously became a believer into the idea that these people were having strange experiences with, at the time, he thought aliens. Now, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but we've got an interview with him he filmed on an internet show, and we feature it in the movie, and he's talking to another PhD psychologist, and he uses these words. He says, what we are dealing with is spirit beings who should have stayed in their realm, but have been coming over and doing, rape-like interventions. And then he says, well, maybe it's not rape to them, but, it's kind of an intervention to try to, wake us up to other realities type of thing. When I heard Max say that, because he obviously comes from a very materialistic background, again, it shows you this is evidence-driven. This is actually what's happening out there. And for the church and for people not to be aware of it, from my point of view, is very sad. I'm not being critical, but one of the aims of the movie is to try to bring awareness, because if people are being spiritually affected, who do they talk to? I mean, you think you've been abducted by aliens and, been, rectally probed and had sex with some beings from another planet on board a ship. You're not exactly going to go to the office tomorrow morning and tell people about it.
Right.
And they suffer all sorts of...
they've been in a fight for their life, their very souls, and they climb out of their room, just panting, and they're supposed to go and put on their suit and tie and pretend like all is well. I mean, it is a devastating thing. That's why I am so disappointed in our government with their little release. I'm like, just lay it all out already. I think out of everything that I've even ever experienced and that I've ever heard, our military abductions, our own government taking our own people and pretending to be an alien abduction or whatever, but they're interrogating people to learn more about the alien phenomena or whatever it is that they're trying to get out of people. It's like those are our own people doing this against them, their brother, their sister. It's sickening, and it needs to be just, addressed straightforward.
Well, one of the other problems, Heidi, is not every UFO group is necessarily a serious group. There are lots of them around the country. So when somebody thinks they've seen a UFO or thinks or believes they've had an experience with aliens, who are they going to talk to? As I said, they don't go to the church. They get shunned. I've met people who said they were literally laughed out of the church. One lady I spoke to who's actually in the movie, the church told her to leave because she was trying to tell people about her story, and they told her to leave. So they go to these UFO research groups, and then what happens is, of course, they're going to say, welcome. We've got people just like you here. And to me, it drives them deeper into the phenomenon. Yeah. And this is something I think I've written about that not a lot of people have written about, and correct me if I'm wrong. But human beings, we're quite complex creatures. So when we are in an isolated situation, the only people we can relate to are the people who have isolated us. So let's think about something closer to home. Let's say a wife is suffering domestic abuse or sexual abuse from a husband or something. You're not going to tell anyone because of the problems it's going to cause. You put up with it. But then what happens is, in a perverse way, the person you reach out to for empathy is the one that's doing the abusing. And I found that it's like this in the abduction phenomenon. Aliens are not interested in sex. They're not interested in harvesting programs. Sex is a mechanism of control. Because once you've had that level of intimacy with somebody, you're going to feel bound to them. And, something called Stockholm Syndrome, which you would have heard of, which is where people get kidnapped and they get locked in a room. And again, the only people they can relate to are the ones who've, basically kidnapped them. And Patty Hearst, of course, was the great candidate of that. If you remember when she stood at a bank and she's sitting there or standing there brandishing a machine gun, she suddenly become aligned with her captor's cause. And I think a great example of that, of course, was Whitley Strieber, who first talked about being terrified and scared and sodomized. And then later on in his writings, he spoke about love in loving terms.
Yes.
So that's the problem, you see, when you go to one of the UFO clinics. If you only get half the story, it's a half-truth. And a half-truth is a half-lie. And then when we know demonstrably that these entities have been lying to us, as Nick Redfern and John Keel and Bud Hopkins and John Mack and everybody will tell you they lie about their true intent, then why would you want to be reinforcing and promoting the idea of having more experience with them and trusting them?
Exactly. That Stockholm Syndrome, I talked about it a lot. I've written in regards to it as well, because it's like I was there. I was in these UFO alien abduction groups watching people who were speaking of outright terror, watching their children being taken from their bedrooms as they're paralyzed and probed and experimented on, and watch the shift to, I'm special. They taught me something. This is supposed to happen, and it was, and then they assisted in the abductions and calming other victims. And I'm like, whoa, what is going on here? I was just someone who had seen UFOs, some massive UFOs. And to listen to that shift, it really scared me. It was absolutely terrifying. So I know what you're speaking of. And it's like, well, hold on. How do we get people to realize the bigger picture and gain back their strength and their faith to take these things on? What do you suggest to people?
Well, I think when I've spoken to people who've had experiences or abductees, they conflate two different things. When you if you turn around and say, well, it's all demonic, or maybe it's this, as I said, you've got to listen. First thing is you have to listen to their stories. And one of the things that struck me, even when I was out speaking in churches on this, I'd be stood up there and I've kind of almost can identify people from the pulpit. You'll get people who are sitting right down the front, who've seen the signboard outside, and they're salivating, waiting for you to say, yeah, ETs are really flying their, hyperdrive spaceships and visiting the Earth. And then you'll see some people or a guy, he's just sat back in the corner or he's not sitting with anybody. And they're the ones that will often come up to me after, and they'll wait till everybody's gone. And this is and I wasn't expecting this, and they'll turn around to me and they say, it was just like you said. It was just like you said. What you described up there, that happened to me. And for the first time in many cases, somebody has understood. Yeah. So you've immediately got this kind of bond of empathy with them because they're saying, you don't think I'm crazy, and you actually understand what happened to me. So that's the first thing, because once you can get people to trust you and not deny their experience, because if you deny it, as I said, they'll just go off to one of those UFO research centers, get hypnotically regressed, get implanted with all sorts of false memories. Who knows what can happen? And then the thing is, you can't even then say, well, let me tell you, it's not what you think it is. Because they go, no, it really happened. Hang on. Yes, I know it really happened, but it's not what you think it is. They conflate the two. So what I do is I ask questions. Did this happen? Did this happen? Were you told this? Were you told this? And what I found was if you can get them to doubt the stories that they're being told, we're sticking needles through your brain and through your eyeball because it's good for you. Hang on. Just stop and think about that a moment. Why, if they're that advanced, why aren't they using the tricorder from, Dr. McCoy's lab on Star Trek? Why do they need to, probe you with blunt objects and torture you? Why do they need to sodomize you and have sex with you? Sorry to be blunt, but it's good to be on an adult show and talk about these things.
Yeah.
So once you get people to doubt it. And I was on a very well-known radio show, one we were just talking about it in the break. I won't mention it unless you don't want me to. But
I don't mind.
Okay, well, it was coast to coast. And it was I was kind of still fairly new to doing the interviews on this subject. And we spoke for 2 hours, and then the first call-in came, and this young man rang up and he said, I've been an abductee since I was 4 years of age. And he was telling me all about his experiences, and I thought, uh-oh, here it comes. He's going to machine gun me and tell me I'm wrong. And he turned around and he said, Mr. Bates, he said, I never thought about it. He said, you're right. He said, they're not highly evolved, benevolent beings. He said, they're malevolent. He said, why have I... And it's suddenly like the lights came on for him. He'd just been driven into it and accepted it, as I say, due to the isolation of the experience. And now he's suddenly gone, yeah, why the hell am I putting up with all of this? It doesn't make sense. And that's the point I think I've found you have to get people to.
Yeah.
If they're given over to it, I'm talking about the one now that welcomes it, that's given into it. The people that are still looking for closure and still aren't sure what's happened, it's obviously a lot easier to talk to them. But if this has been happening to someone for several years and they've just kind of accepted it and as I say, been given over to it, that's where I work. I try to get them to doubt the experience, doubt what they're being told. And as I mentioned before, Nick Redfern has shown, this was something I independently picked up, but he agreed. He said, in the 50s and 60s, they were from Venus and Saturn, and now we can test those places. Now they're from the Pleiades and Sirius, and, where we can't test their claims. The goalposts keep moving. They've made predictions about the future that have been false and haven't come to pass. Why do they hide their true nature? Why do they, I wrote in the book, Meeting an Objection Head On, and I'd say, people will come up with excuses of why they rape and abduct people.
Oh, they sure do.
Yeah, I say, I wrote up, perhaps they don't say please on Pleiades, But if they've been overseeing us for all of this time, Holly, then they know what it does to human beings, and there's no excuse.
Yeah, I like to say, if you had a friend who, when they came over, they kept smacking you upside the head, would you welcome that friend in the room still? Why would you open your arms to that? I think you would take away the invitation to that friend, and it's just so funny. The comeback from people who are loyal to their abductors are like, well, I had to be harmed in order to learn. Like you spank your children. I'm like, did you first reach out to them and said, hey, abuse me and I'll learn? No, something is wrong with the whole picture. And it's a crying shame how so many people, the horror of abductions as the groups are concerned. And I always say, I don't want to judge people for what they believe to be true for themselves, but in being in these groups and observing them for so many years now, I've been involved in this for over 20 years, and seeing the people embrace their experiences now when they were once considered to be so horrific, and everything being love and light, and I just send them light and they send it back, and I'm like, that's not true. Yeah. I've been around this. I know what you're speaking of. So it's interesting to have seen this shift. As you go forward, and I have to give you kudos though first, because you said you spoke in the churches about this. I am blown away. I'm blown away. I have to ask you if you have known of people who speak of more positive alien beings who do not abduct and who warn against the beings who do abductions.
The only ones, in terms of positive abduction experiences, I have never met one. I've met plenty. Not abduction,
not abduction, but
yes.
Communication even.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. I'll tell you. In fact, I was speaking in Roswell, and this white-haired man who I found out is the MUFON rep for Roswell. I was there. I was actually speaking on creation, evolution in some of the churches, and I was also at a UFO conference there. I don't know if you know Guy Malone. He'd organized.
Oh, yes. I know
so
him, yeah.
he had me there speaking. And so I had some book tables out there, and this gentleman walks along, and he says, he's saying to the people browsing the books, you don't have to believe this. This is not right. You don't have to accept this. And so when I had a moment by myself with him, I challenged him, and he said, well, yours is only one view. He said, there are many ways to God. Jesus is just one way. And then he told me that he meets with Jesus on a regular basis. At least twice a week he appears in his room. And he said, let me tell you what Jesus said. And I said, well, no, just hold on. I said, it's an illogical statement to say that all religions are equal and there are many ways to God. Because Jesus, for example, says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now, he's either a lunatic or a liar, or he's telling the truth. It's an illogical premise to say that all ways are equal. So I said, look, let me give you an example. I said, let's take those guys who stole some aeroplanes full of passengers and flew them into the buildings on 9/11. Now, according to their religion, it was virtuous to do that because the minute that they were killed and martyred themselves, they get an immediate ticket into paradise. Now, I know I'm being politically incorrect here, but that's fine. I mean, I'm a creationist, so what the heck? And I said, so if all ways are true, I said, is that way true? Would you agree? Did they hear the truth? Is that the truth? They may have even had an experience, but was it truthful? And he said, well, I just want to tell you about what Jesus says to me. And I said, look, just answer the question, please. And he wouldn't. And then there was some guy, I could see him on the side. He was just sidling up, listening to our conversation. It was getting more animated. And then he turned around to this MUFON guy and he said, answer the man's damn question, referring to me. And he said, no, they're not all truthful. And I said, so lots of people can have experiences. I said, but it doesn't mean that they're all truthful in nature. And he just walked away and left. No. You see, and that's what I found is when people have these contacts, when they're told that it's all positive and, it's a very, very ecumenical, holistic sounding message. And I mean, the New Age contactees are full of this, Barbara Marchiniak and everybody else.
I know what you're speaking of. Okay. Yeah. Everything is love and light in the universe. I've had people that are like, oh, come on. Why would these, highly intelligent beings cross the universe just to abuse us? I'm like, why did Christopher Columbus come across, and abuse everybody he met? It's like, because they could, it's like, but one of the things that I've come across and personally experienced that was of a positive nature. I have not had abductions, thank God, but something that happened to my college roommate, who was a Pentecostal, long-haired, long dress wearing person who thought that aliens were all demons and had an encounter that changed the scope of so much. And then I met a group of people called the Light Side Group, and they had something very similar. And it wasn't these typical beings that you hear out there that are, abducting and telling people this, and that. They spoke of God and watch out for these aliens that are grabbing people, and this is how you get rid of them. Use Jesus. I mean,
yes. Yes, I have heard that. I can confirm
heard of
that.
Those?
Yes,
okay.
I have. Sorry, now I know where you're headed. Yeah, I've had people speak to me, and I believe it. I, to be honest, I don't encourage them to use it as a testimony, and here's why: because if we're just basing the testimony or our version of the truth upon experience, as I've said. What makes it more valid than the other person's experience or the other person's experience? I think you've got to have a framework of discernment.
Oh, yes.
And I think you've got to look at the Bible, because the Bible is not only, increasingly we're finding to be scientifically accurate. It's historically accurate. It's never been disproven in that respect. Archaeology, we're finding more and more finds all the time. And it talks about this spiritual realm. I mean, Jesus stood there before Pontius Pilate and he said, my kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is from another place. And Paul writes in Galatians, even if we or an angel from heaven should come and preach another gospel other than the one we've preached to you, let him be eternally condemned. And you go on, and Satan masquerades as an angel of light. So again, if we strip down the cultural view of angels, but actually have a look at what the text is saying, that's the source we should use. Because you and I can't go to that spiritual realm, so we've got to have a source that can help us understand that spiritual realm. And, of course, it's very clear that these spiritual beings will come over and try to deceive people. Jesus says, in the latter days, false there'll be signs and wonders and false messiahs. He gives us a heads up, for crying out loud.
Oh, yes, yeah. It's an interesting time. There's a phenomenon. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but speaking of the trying times that we're in, Jesus encounters are going up through the roof, and especially in the Middle East to those of the Muslim faith. Yep. And then there's this phenomenon called the Hat Man phenomenon I put out there, and he is a guy in a three-piece suit, a gaucho hat, or in a trench coat or a cape, and he goes to people, thousands of stories, trying to grab people by the soul of them and trying to get them to work for him. And he will say he is the devil. And it's ridiculous. It's so through the roof. I meet people every day that have experienced him, and something is going on. Now, in the interesting part, you'll get a kick out of this. This Hat Man guy has been seen right alongside alien beings sometimes. So talk about demons, right?
Yeah.
So it's getting interesting.
Well, when you think of how the culture's changed, that we have plenty of media shows where Lucifer's being depicted as a good guy, where demons are just another life form or spiritual form, and they're a little bit mischievous, but they're not really bad. And of course, we've totally desensitized the supernatural. So again, it makes people more open to the experience. That's what I found is, and isn't it interesting? I think I quoted in my book Richard McNally, who's a skeptic, an atheist. He speaks at the skeptics conferences here in the States and around the world, and he's another Harvard researcher. But and so he does not believe people are being abducted or having spiritual experiences. But he says his research shows that people who believed in bioenergetic therapies or had messed around with tarot cards, Ouija boards, generally had a predisposition to New Age beliefs, were more likely to believe that they were being afflicted by aliens or having these contacts and encounters. So when that comes from someone who doesn't even believe in it all, but he says there's a pattern there, he's saying he thinks it's obviously a psychological predisposition to fantasy, but of course it's not, because as Susan Blackmore and all of these people have tried to scientifically explain away the feelings of strange people in a room by increasing electromagnetic currents in the room. Well, that's all well and good. You can have those feelings, but when people have very detailed stories of things that they've been told, it can't account for those types of those types of details or elements in the abduction scenario.
Yeah, it's oh my gosh, it's so odd. I don't know if you got to answering it fully in regards to if you've seen a shift and a change as far as alien abductions are concerned more recently. Like, have you heard of anybody just calling them demons outright instead of it was an alien?
Well, the big surprise to me was to hear Nick Redfern say that.
Yeah.
But he's one of the few honest researchers around. When we interviewed him, he said that very much his thoughts have shifted over the years. In fact, I wrote an article on our website, and the reason I looked him up is because I wrote to him and I said, I applaud you for your honesty. He said, years ago I thought they were aliens in spaceships, and John Keel was a big influence on him and how it shifted away. And he basically said, you shouldn't have anything to do with it. It changes people's worldviews. They're traumatized. And so, rather than from, in my early days, MUFON were looking at it and trying to figure it out, but I never saw much help being given to people. Yeah. And I do kind of think in some ways that the cover is being blown, because if you can, that's why I said earlier, if you can get people just to see some common sense, say, we've got all these sci-fi stories about all this technology in the future, so why do they want to come and do these horrible things to you? Right. We're seeing all sorts of things. I wrote in my book, and a lot of people didn't know this, that abductions were never done by the Greys. The Greys pretty much didn't exist until the 70s, until Spielberg's movie. And then we had an acceleration of them. But now you've got the reptilians, you've got Nordics, you've got insectoids, you've got all sorts of things. And
you got a Star Wars bar scene.
And then you've got people having now experiences with men in black and women in black who are walking up to the front door. I mean, what is going on there? Yeah.
I got to tell you, it was about 10 years ago, myself and Nick and several other people, Jim Mars and whatnot, we were doing a new television series for Discovery Channel, and I had a lot of deep conversations in regards to Nick in regard talking about these beings being demonic and just kind of like just going through the whole thing. It was really, really fascinating, and to get his scientific take on so much. What doesn't he know? Honestly, he's covered so many different topics. But we got to get to our next break. Welcome back, everybody. How's it going? We are talking with Gary Bates, and I have to tell you guys to check out his movie. Get the information for that, Gary, so everybody can check it out.
Well, the movie is Alien Intrusion, Unmasking A Deception, one night only. We hope to get more nights. That'll depend upon how many people turn up the first night. They get tickets at fathomevents.com, or they can go to alienintrusion.com, and they can punch in their zip code, find a theatre near them, and book tickets. And it's just wise to get tickets in advance, because when it's one night, sometimes these things do get sold out in certain locations. So, fathomevents.com. It is exciting. When you think about it, Heidi, there are very few movies in this genre that actually tell it like it is, because most movies are out there to make money. So they kind of tell people what they want to hear because they want it to be popular. We're a faith-funded Christian ministry, so we have an obligation to what we believe is the truth. We're not out there to make money out of it. We just want the information to be spread as wide as possible. And I could hear it in your voice and your tone, which has emboldened me to speak more frankly in this interview, I have to say. Because normally when people don't know and they're first timers, you've got to tread very carefully. But
I know what you're talking about.
But people's lives are being wrecked by this phenomenon. They're being absolutely wrecked. And you, like me, have a sense of frustration. And I have to say, I have to keep that in balance and give credit where it's due, because most people are just ignorant about it. Yeah. So that's why they're going to say, I don't want to know, put their hands up, it's all crazy. So the aim of this movie is to bring awareness. And I pray to God that people get some closure after seeing this movie, particularly the ending. We've had people coming out in tears in the draft screenings, because it shows there is an answer to this phenomenon.
That's beautiful. I can't tell you how many years I've waited to hear of someone making something like this. And my friends are in the chat room who are part of the Light Side group. I know they're ecstatic too, because it's been like, plugging away, like, come on, people, wake up. Do you realize what we're dealing with here? And it's like, gosh, who has the money to pull something together to tell it like it is? And this is phenomenal what you're doing. I cannot applaud you enough for the effort. Donations
are still welcome, because we fundraise to make the movie.
Hey,
but here's the other thing I want to say. And again, everyone thinks their own movie is the best. It's actually the third one that we've done. But the comments we've had is it's Hollywood quality. We've made it entertaining. There's a lot of special effects. There's animations.
Nice.
We spend a lot of money on great B-roll. We went all over the country. We went to Roswell. And as I say, I even went to South Korea to interview my old friend Joe Jordan, because he moved countries. So, I think people will be impressed with the quality. The music score was composed. A great young composer called Clifford Bradley in the UK. I just think the music was inspired. If there's anything I just love in this, it's the music. It starts off with Morse code to a musical theme, and you can hear it in the background, and he never told me. I just loved the tune, and then he told me halfway through the project the Morse code is actually reading out, "We are not alone."
I love that, because some people will really understand it and start giggling in the middle of the movie, and people won't know why. It's like, oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. In talking about the whole point of the film and realizing that this is more of a spiritual warfare that we're dealing with. And one element that a lot of people don't seem to understand, near-death experiencers who just so happen to have had alien abductions. I don't know if you've talked to people who have had that, and at the end of their tunnel are the beings who were victimizing them in this lifetime. And I always would say, why do you think that is? These beings are able to walk through a wall for a reason. It's interdimensional, it's spiritual, and it's always frustrated me. And lo and behold, a couple of years back, I saw this television show that had people talking about near-death experiences, and there was one full episode of nothing but people who had, like, they'd gone through into another planet and saw other aliens, and it was so amazing. So it was called I Survived Beyond and Back. That's what it was called.
You certainly are a sister from another mother, because I've never spoken to anybody about that before, but I actually wrote about that in my book, that people are on this operating table and they see themselves on the table, and then they get the light at the end of the tunnel, and they see their deceased relatives standing next to aliens on the other side. So,
see that? Wow, I got to get your book.
Yeah, because I tell you what, here's something interesting we can talk about. I mean, obviously, I do not believe that people are being abducted on spaceships. They do not pass through the walls. They do not go up on the spaceships. They are not literally being, examined with, medical objects. They're not seeing hybrid breeding rooms. They're not being taken on a galactic tour all in 2 hours and then returned to their room. But how do you account for all the very rich details that physically seem real? And sometimes people do have physical markings. I think they're put there to add to the illusion. And when I first came with the first edition of the book, I had some idea, and I thought, well, I don't want to go out on a limb, but what I didn't expect from the book is that I ended up having hundreds of people contact me. And in a couple of areas, I could use it as kind of a test bed of research to test out a hypothesis. And I don't know what you think about this, but my view on this, I've called it the hypnosis theory, because the number one clue is the missing time that people have. They're driving the car, they see a light, they're in the room, time disappears. Now, I went and worked with some clinical hypnotherapists on this. And when we go to bed at night and we wake up in the morning, right, let's say we sleep for 7 hours, but physically we're aware that we're asleep and some time has passed. But these people who are abductees or experiencers, they have the experience, they see an entity in their room, or they're driving the car, and then it's like, to them, it seems like 1 second later, they wake up, and then they look at the dashboard and 3 hours have gone. Well, how can that be? Well, that can be induced in two ways. And I often like to give analogies that people can understand. And if you've ever had surgery, I've had surgery, you've been in the operating theater, they stick the anesthetic in and they say, count to 10 and you get to about 4. That's all you can remember. And then it seems like it was just 1 second later you wake up in the recovery room, and you say, have they started? And they go, no, that was 3 hours ago. We finished. We've been waiting for you to wake up. There's been a contraction of time. And the other way time can be contracted in a like manner is through hypnosis. And hypnosis is really about just being put into a state. It's not the stage stuff, where people wave their watch. That's a nonsense. It's all for show. But hypnosis is really getting a person to a height or a stage of heightened suggestibility. And the times when we are most suggestible, and believe it or not, and this is going to resonate with you, is not deep REM sleep. It's what we call our hypnagogic or hypnopompic states. And this is when we're transitioning into or out of sleep. And this is the number one time when people have this experience, or they see a light that induces this hypnotic state. And I got fascinated with a guy called Darren Brown. He's an English hypnotist. You've probably heard of him, watched his shows, where he can even replace childhood memories just talking to somebody across a table by getting their focus. He'll implant memories, overlay it during the conversation. There's one great episode, and I featured this in a lecture, which is on a DVD called Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind that I did, where he shows a guy goes into the bedroom, and the family have put him up to it. He wakes the guy up so he can get him out of that REM sleep. The infrared cameras are there. He suggests these things to the guy, doesn't tell us what it is because the guy would always be suggestible. And then later they tell him he's won an all-expenses paid holiday. So he's got to get a passport. So he goes to a local shopping mall, walks in the photo booth, the lights flash, puts him to sleep with the words, the key trigger words were laid. And you see them wheeling him out on a stretcher, and they put him in a plane, and they take him from London, England to Marrakesh, Morocco, put him in the photo booth, flash the lights, wake him up, and he can hear, and you can actually hear the snake charming music going on outside in the hustle and bustle of the market. He opens the curtain, To him, 1 second ago, he was in his bedroom in London. Now, here's the thing. To him, there's a contraction of time. But in the actual time that's passed, you have the potential to put in all sorts of stories. And you could tell people, for example, you're on a spaceship. You can literally say you felt the cold steel of the bench, and they will feel it. You can actually even experience the physical sensations. And the last bit on this, everybody's had a falling dream. You know, where you're lying in bed and you feel like you're falling?
Yeah.
That's a similar example where you physically felt like you were falling. So the mind, the imagination can create the physical sensation because of a false memory that you are going through in your mind. So let me just be clear. I think the events are real. All I'm saying is some of the fine details. You know, you can't be taken through the ceiling of your house onto a spaceship and get taken off to the Pleiades and return back in 3 hours. But they're the false memories that people have, and it adds to the alien deception. It adds to the illusion that people have been, abducted by aliens. That's the point.
But what of people who have experienced like double abduction, where I've met parents who have watched their kids being floated out of a window and they are paralyzed. Yep. So what of that? How do you explain that?
Well, it can be done to groups. In fact, go and watch Derren Brown again. He can even be on a noisy street corner in a city, and as long as he gets the group's attention through suggestion. I mean, a classic example of that, Heidi, is the Allagash 4. You have 4 guys who didn't remember. They remembered being out on a boat in a lake in Maine. They saw the light coming down. That was the last thing they remember. They woke up. They were all stood on the shore, and the big fire that they built had burnt down to embers. And they promised that they would tell nobody, and they all went away, but they continued to have night terrors. They went to see doctors and therapists, and then they decided to all get back together, and they found they had exactly the same memories. So it can actually be done in a group scenario, so that you can all incorporate the same memories. So
well, that's interesting. One thing I have to say, because I have experienced military abductions, but not alien abductions, but it went very similar to one. And I always said they have their hands on whatever it is that the alien abductions are able to do, because it seems like you're in one place 1 second, next you're there, and their ability to paralyze you and render you unable to defend yourself. So definitely, I get what you're saying. I get it.
Yeah, here's a huge misconception, because whenever I mention this to people, their first reaction is, "Well, I could never be hypnotized." In some bonus footage that we have, which we may well later put into a DVD version whenever that comes out, I have a guy from his name is Jim Allen. He's worked on over 1,500 cases of abductions. These are people who were taken into cults, and he is a Christian, but he's a forensic pathologist, or for a forensic hypnotherapist, I should say.
Wow.
So he uses hypnotherapy to try to help people, and he's well aware that some of the memories we have are a mixture of reality and when I say fiction, it sounds like people are making up, but non-reality. Yeah. And the great father of hypnotherapy, Al Krasner, has actually said that. And a classic example of this, Heidi, is there's an organization exists in the United States called the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. Because you remember years ago there was an epidemic of men going to jail, and uncles and distant relatives, because women were sometimes having crises in their lives. Maybe it was a midlife, and they'd go off to these therapists, and they'd been taught typically to hypnotize people and look for elements of childhood abuse that the patient, they believed, had kind of repressed or locked up.
Right.
Now, testimony under hypnosis in those days was admissible in court. It's not now, because the only way you can ever verify a memory is by external corroboration if you don't have it. And all the leading hypnotherapists now know that even stuff that you bring out under hypnosis is not necessarily true. You have to be very, very skilled, Jim Allen said, not to inadvertently plant suggestions when you are looking for answers. For example, if you went and said, "Did anybody touch you inappropriately when you were a child?" you might think of an example where you were touched and all of a sudden you've incorporated that suggestion and it becomes something that it's not. This is a real medical phenomenon. There's nothing spiritual in it or anything like that.
Right.
And if my point is, if human beings can very easily do that to one another, how much more could very, very clever demonic entities who've been following mankind around for, millennia, a wise man once wrote, there's nothing new under the sun as well. And we just sow the seeds of, extraterrestrial visitation and contact. How come it wasn't like that 200 years ago? How come it was fairies? But if you look at it, the morphology, the going to another place, going into other realms, sexual encounters, the physical sense of it all happening was exactly the same. So once you implant this type of suggestion or memory, the problem is people cannot distinguish it from reality. And I'm not saying the whole episode is accounted for by that.
I bet you get a lot of static in regards to that, because I know, some people know what they've experienced. And it's
Absolutely.
like, I always have a hard time, saying to someone, you're wrong, I'm right. It's like, because everybody is so different. I want to get to a quick question from the chat room. Russ is asking, the revelation of Jesus Christ mentions in chapter 21, verse 16, the dimensions of the New Jerusalem as being 12,000 furlongs or 1,380 miles cube-like craft. Does guest have an opinion as to who is piloting this planet-sized craft?
Well, I don't think it actually says it's a craft. It's giving the dimensions of a physical place. And in the same way that I said that I think, people have a wrong view of angels, that they are called ministering spirits, but we also are spirit. The spirit is a component of who we are. It's not the sum of who we are. And so I believe that the new heavens and earth, whilst they might be a spiritual place, they're going to be a physical place. When, as I said, when Jesus reappeared to his disciples, he just appeared in the room, but he said to Thomas, put your finger here, your hand here. He sits down on the shores of Galilee and he ate food. The eternity we experience is going to be interesting. When I think of God being in eternity, I believe he is a timeless being. Because you and I are bound by time. When the earth rotates, we have to have this physical, planet made of atoms with a light source to determine what time is. And our eternity is kind of going to be different. I think it's going to exist in time, but in a sense, it's going to be never ending. And, in that passage, is it in Thessalonians, when it says we're going to be transformed in the twinkling of an eye from perishable to imperishable, it's describing some form. It's
a shift.
Some stuff. Yeah. And when angels appear, they appear physically, yet they're able to come from another realm, whether we call it the spiritual realm or another realm. So in other words, I'm kind of saying it's another existence that's a little bit unlike ours. Ours is terminal. We're going through the throes of death. This creation is going to wind down until there's going to be a new heavens and a new earth. So we failed the nest here.
I've learned that there's going to be a shift, and some of us will notice it and some of us won't, and we'll just kind of move into the next vibration of things, of reality. Another question for you. What do you think of the secret space program that's been talked about a lot? If there's no out there, why are we having this secret space program? Well,
I don't think everybody in the government would necessarily agree that they're dealing with the spiritual realm. As I said, when you get someone like Harry Reid who makes the comment, he's making a comment based on ignorance, I think. I don't think he's part of the inner sanctum, that Nick Redfern may have referred to when some parts of the government think that they're dealing with something demonic. But, the governments have tried astral projection, all of that type of stuff. So they're certain, years ago they even had Uri Geller in. I think he was a hoax, a fraud, but they've certainly messed with psychics, and there's something there to do it. But I don't think that they could justify spending lots and lots of money. But the looking out in space for extraterrestrial life is really just consistent with the view of naturalism, because, if there was a Big Bang 14 billion years ago, and they believe that our Milky Way is in a relatively young part of the universe, there could be parts of the universe or other galaxies out there that might be 1 million or billion years older than us, and therefore those aliens could have evolved or developed the technology a million or billion years in advance of us. And I wrote in my book, us trying to communicate them even with what we think is sophisticated, it might be akin to somebody in a jungle banging on his leopard skin drum trying to pick up some, eavesdrop on someone with his smartphone. So I think they're just being consistent with what they believe in a big picture. They believe that there's biology on other planets. That's why we've got rovers on Mars. They're looking for life. They're looking for organisms because they want to know how life evolved out there. I'm not a subscriber to evolution, so I think they're looking in the wrong place as well.
So what do you... Well, I guess let's put out your information there again. How can people get a hold of your book and go see this movie, just for people joining us now?
Sure. Well, the book is on Amazon. Just type in Alien Intrusion. It's in hardcover and Kindle, or go to creation.com, our web store. And the movie is fathomevents.com or alienintrusion.com. You just type in your zip code. The search is a little funky. Don't hit enter. As you type in your zip code, a little box populates underneath. You've got to click on it, and it'll show you a theatre near you, and you can book tickets. So January 11th, one night only. Hey, please make it 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Now, in all of this that I have to get this in all of this that you've been researching and looking into, what have you personally experienced that has moved you, that's been out of the ordinary?
Do I have to tell you?
Oh, yes, because I'm holding you hostage. Yes. Got a few minutes left. I got to get that in there.
Well, I had no idea that it was an alien, or anything like that. But I had the sleep paralysis. Oh. I didn't become a Christian until my adult years. So, like any person later in life who's had a conversion experience like that, you get pretty excited about your newfound faith. And I'd only been saved about 3 days, and I was lying in bed, and a dark cloud appeared in the room. I described it as a black hole because I could move my eyes to the left and right. I could see other parts of the room. I could see my wife asleep. But when I looked into this dark cloud, it was a void. It was black. There was nothing in the other side. So I described it as a black hole. And I've heard this story hundreds of times now, by the way. And so I laid in bed. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. And I watched it, and it descended upon me. And as it descended, I felt myself going back into the bed. It came to cover my face. And then as it got to my face, it slid down my body. It moved down towards my chin. I remember, and this is how well I can remember, I remember taking a sigh of relief, thinking, whatever it is, it's left me alone. And then it started to choke me. It started to grab me. And here I was. I knew nothing about spiritual warfare. I knew nothing about demonology. I was a baby Christian. I was just excited that Jesus is the answer. And I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. And all I could do was get out the words in a croaky, grumbled, Jesus, help me. And it stopped in an instant. It stopped dead in its tracks. So I've had first-hand experience as to what can stop these things.
Do you know, I named the phenomenon called shadow people, and that is their MO, and they work right alongside alien beings too. That is what my book, The Secret War, was based on, is shadow people and the aliens. So what you describe, I'm typing in the chat room going, oh my goodness, shadow people. He had a shadow people encounter. But the same MO. You've heard of them? The shadow people?
I've heard, well, you can go to third world countries and they've all got different names for them, of course.
Yeah.
I've been in India and people have told me about the same experiences,
yes.
etc. It's all over the world. And what we know about the alleged alien phenomenon, as we've discussed, Nick and John Keel and Valet and all those people who've seriously researched it, it takes different forms. You know, if you go to a third world country like Papua New Guinea, where I've been, they don't have any ideas about extraterrestrials flying in technologically advanced spaceships, but they have their encounters.
I've seen something similar, what you're talking about with the shadow people, and when it retracted, it formed a gray alien's face when it left. Yep. Just the craziest thing. So, we've come to the bottom of the show. I have to really thank you for coming on, Gary Bates. This has been a phenomenal. I could talk to you forever.
It's been good fun. Thank you.
Yeah, so hold the line, and I'm going to close up the show. And my goodness, everybody, this went too fast. I got to have him back on, and I will. I'm going to have him on UFO Headline News, so watch for that. So remember, you guys can catch me here every Friday, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. You've been listening to me, Heidi Hollis, the Outlander. Remembering always, if it's weird, we're here. Good night, everybody.